My name is Sydney, and at 33 years old, I finally learned that the price of family loyalty is sometimes your own destruction. I am quitting my job at the company, and you will take care of us while I figure things out. That was the text message from my brother Bradley that popped up on my phone on a quiet Tuesday morning. I stared at the screen, letting the sheer entitlement of his words wash over me before typing my cold reply. That is not on me. I hit send, placed my phone face down on my mahogany desk, and picked up my favorite silver pen. With a steady hand, I signed a highly lucrative contract to become the new vice president of a prestigious Swiss investment bank in Geneva. 15 minutes later, my phone buzzed again, vibrating violently against the wood. This time, it was a text from my mother Brenda. You will transfer $10,000 to your brother by Friday, or I am calling the police and reporting you for corporate embezzlement. You are not leaving this family high and dry. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to set ruthless boundaries with toxic relatives who treated you like a walking ATM. You will definitely want to stick around to see how I handled this extortion. Later that afternoon, I was in the middle of zipping up my second suitcase in the bedroom of my downtown penthouse apartment. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a sweeping view of the city skyline, a view I had paid for with years of grueling 80-hour work weeks. Suddenly, the sound of the front door unlocking echoed through the hallway. I froze. I had not given anyone the spare key. Before I could even walk out of the bedroom, heavy footsteps marched across my hardwood floors. My mother Brenda stormed into the living room, followed closely by Bradley and my sister-in-law Jasmine. Jasmine is a stunning, fiercely sharp African-American woman who always knew exactly how to manipulate a room. She had a taste for luxury that far exceeded Bradley's actual income, and she never hesitated to play the victim when anyone questioned her spending habits. They had clearly stolen my emergency spare key from the lockbox downstairs. I walked out of the bedroom, crossing my arms over my chest. "What are you doing in my home?" I asked, keeping my voice dangerously level. They ignored my question entirely. Jasmine bypassed me, walking straight into my walk-in closet as if she were shopping at a boutique. I watched in disbelief as she casually lifted my limited edition Hermes Birkin bag from the top shelf and draped it over her arm. "Well, since you are running away to Europe, we will be taking over the apartment," Jasmine announced, inspecting her manicure while holding my bag. "Bradley is incredibly stressed right now from the toxic work environment you created at the family company. We need the space to decompress. Oh, and we will be needing the keys to your Porsche. It is the least you can do after abandoning him." I marched straight up to Jasmine and firmly pulled the Birkin bag off her arm, stepping back to create a solid boundary. "This is my property, Jasmine, and my car is staying in storage. You are not getting a single thing from me." Bradley scoffed from the living room couch, throwing his feet up onto my glass coffee table. "Stop being so selfish, Sydney. I am your older brother. I need a break to figure out my next business venture. You have plenty of money saved up. You can afford to let us use your car and stay here." I laughed, a sharp, humorless sound that made my mother flinch. "A break? You just quit your job as the CEO of the family business because you are too lazy to show up to the office. And you think you are entitled to my car, just like you needed my brand new car when I was 22. The car you wrapped around a telephone pole while driving drunk, leaving me to take the blame when Mom convinced the police I was the one behind the wheel so her golden boy would not go to jail. I have a criminal record because of you, Bradley. The free rides are permanently over." My mother's face turned crimson. She stepped forward, digging into her designer tote bag, and aggressively slapped a thick stack of papers onto my kitchen island. It was a pile of maxed-out credit card statements, all in Jasmine's name, totaling tens of thousands of dollars in designer clothes, luxury vacations, and high-end restaurant bills. "You are going to pay these," Brenda commanded, pointing a shaking finger at the statements. Your brother is going through a transitional phase, and his marriage needs support. You have been hoarding the salary we generously gave you at the family company. It is time to pay your fair share. I looked at the statements, then looked directly into my mother's eyes. I built the financial infrastructure for that company from the ground up while Bradley played golf and expensed his bar tabs. I earned every single penny of my salary, and I am not paying for Jasmine's shopping addiction. Brenda slammed her hand on the marble counter. If you do not pay these bills right now, I will use my shareholder voting power to freeze every single one of your domestic bank accounts. I will tell the board you stole company funds, and I will make sure the authorities stop you from ever boarding that plane to Geneva. You will be ruined, Sydney. They stood there, a united front of entitlement and malice, completely confident that their threats would break me just like they always had when I was younger. They expected tears. They expected me to panic, apologize, and pull out my checkbook to buy their temporary affection. Instead, I felt absolutely nothing but a cold, clear sense of liberation. I walked over to the kitchen island, picked up the spare set of apartment keys they had used to break in, and tossed them casually onto the counter, right next to Jasmine's massive credit card bills. Go ahead, Mom. I smiled, grabbing my suitcase handle. Call the board. Call the police. Freeze whatever you think you can find. In fact, please make yourselves at home here in the apartment. Jasmine smirked triumphantly, thinking I had surrendered. Bradley let out a loud sigh of relief, already reaching for the TV remote. But as I pulled my luggage toward the front door, I paused and looked back at them one last time. Just a fair warning, I added smoothly. I sold this apartment 3 weeks ago to a corporate leasing agency. The new owners are arriving with their moving crew at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, and they have a zero-tolerance policy for trespassers. Enjoy your stay. I stepped out into the hallway, pulled the door shut behind me, and headed straight to the airport. I had a flight to catch and a financial empire to dismantle. The hum of the jet engines faded into the background as I navigated through the busy terminals of London Heathrow. My layover was only 4 hours, just enough time to grab a black coffee at the first-class lounge and catch up on emails before my connecting flight to Geneva. I found a quiet corner overlooking the tarmac, set my laptop bag down, and pulled out my phone. I had 32 missed calls. 20 of them were from my mother, 8 from Bradley, and 4 from an unknown number. I ignored the family barrage and checked my voicemail. The most recent message was from David, my personal attorney back in the States. His tone was not his usual calm demeanor. Sydney, call me the absolute second you land. We have a massive problem with the apartment sale. I dialed his number immediately. He answered on the first ring. Sydney. Thank God, David breathed into the receiver. Where are you right now, London? I replied, taking a sip of my coffee. What is going on with the apartment, David? I told my family I sold it, but the corporate leasing agency is supposed to finalize the transfer of keys this morning. Did they find my family squatting there? David sighed heavily. Worse. The sale has been frozen. The bank just sent a foreclosure notice and a repo team is legally seizing the property as we speak. I nearly dropped my coffee. That is impossible. I own that penthouse outright. There is no mortgage. There was not a mortgage. David corrected, his voice tight. But there is a $2 million commercial lien against it as of 48 hours ago. I just pulled the filings. Your brother Bradley took out a massive corporate loan through the family logistics company. He listed your penthouse as the primary collateral. My blood ran ice cold. I stared out the massive glass windows at the planes taxiing on the runway. He cannot do that. He does not have the deed, and he certainly does not have my authorization. He forged your signature, Sydney. He submitted paperwork naming you as the personal guarantor for the company loan. The bank processed it because you are still technically listed as a minority shareholder of the family business. When the logistics company defaulted on the first major repayment yesterday, the bank immediately triggered the collateral clause. They are taking your home. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together in my mind with sickening clarity. This was why Bradley had suddenly texted me that he was quitting his job as CEO. He was not stressed. He was not taking a break to figure things out. He was fleeing the scene of a massive financial crime because he knew the corporate auditors were coming. And this was exactly why my mother and Jasmine had broken into my apartment so confidently. They were not just trying to squat in my home to annoy me. They were trying to take possession of the asset before the bank could lock them out, probably planning to sell off my valuables to cover their tracks. I closed my eyes, picturing Jasmine standing in my walk-in closet, casually throwing my limited edition Hermes bag over her shoulder. I remembered the towering stack of maxed-out credit card bills my mother had slammed onto my kitchen island. It all made perfect sense now. The family logistics business had been struggling for years under Bradley's incompetent leadership, but somehow Jasmine had been flaunting new diamond jewelry, flying first class to Dubai, and driving a brand new Range Rover. Bradley had not just ruined the company. He had actively embezzled $2 million through a fraudulent loan to fund his wife's lavish lifestyle, and he had used my name and my home to do it. Sydney. Are you still there? David asked, sounding genuinely concerned by my silence. We need to contact the authorities immediately. This is federal wire fraud and identity theft. If we do not get ahead of this, the bank could come after your liquid assets next. I opened my eyes. The initial shock had entirely evaporated, replaced by a razor-sharp calculating calm. No, David. Do not call anyone yet. Let the bank seize the apartment. Let my family watch the locks get changed. David sounded bewildered. Sydney, they are stealing $2 million from you. You could lose everything you have worked for. I smiled, though there was absolutely no warmth in it. They are not stealing from me, David. They are stealing from a highly aggressive corporate entity. I need you to forward me the exact name of the commercial lender that issued Bradley the loan. Send the documents to my encrypted email right now. I hung up the phone and opened my laptop. Less than a minute later, the PDF files from David hit my inbox. I zoomed in on the lender's letterhead. A quiet, dark laugh escaped my lips. I did not need to scream at my mother or beg my brother for the truth. Bradley had thought he was so clever, burying his fraud in a web of corporate debt. But he had made one fatal, catastrophic mistake. The lender he had defrauded was an American subsidiary that had just been fully acquired in a massive buyout last month. And the parent company that now owned that $2 million debt was the exact Swiss investment bank I was flying to Geneva to run. Bradley had not just forged documents to steal my house, he had just made me his absolute, undisputed master. I closed my laptop in the London Heathrow lounge, a quiet sense of triumph settling over me. The board had hired me at the Swiss bank specifically for my ruthless efficiency in debt restructuring, but this was going to be a masterpiece of personal demolition. I did not need to react immediately. The trap was already set. I just needed my family to walk willingly into the steel jaws. 2 hours later, just as they were calling my boarding group for the Geneva flight, my phone vibrated with an incoming FaceTime call. It was Jasmine. Normally, I would have declined, but knowing what I knew now, I tapped accept. The screen instantly filled with blinding sunshine and the loud chatter of a high society event. Jasmine was holding her phone up high, capturing the sweeping green lawns and white tents of the elite Oakwood Country Club. She was wearing a diamond tennis bracelet and sipping champagne. Sydney, Jasmine practically screamed over the noise, making sure everyone around her could hear. We are all so incredibly worried about you. Why are you dodging our calls? Several wealthy acquaintances turned to look at the screen. Jasmine painted me as the villain seamlessly. You left Bradley in such a terrible state. You know he is struggling to keep the family company afloat, and now we find out you are hiding money in European bank accounts. It is just so selfish, Sydney. We are family. She was putting on an Oscar-worthy performance for her country club friends, framing me as the greedy runaway sister. The camera shifted abruptly as my mother Brenda snatched the phone from Jasmine. Her face was tight with manufactured authority. Sydney, you listen to me, Brenda hissed, leaning close to the microphone so her country club friends would not hear the venom in her voice. Your brother had to make some difficult financial maneuvers to save the logistics company from the mess you left behind. The bank is being unreasonable. But we can fix this. I have my lawyers drafting a document right now. You are going to sign over your 30% equity in the company to Bradley. We will use your shares to pacify the bank. And if I refuse, I asked, keeping my voice perfectly flat. Brenda sneered. If you refuse, I am submitting a file to the FBI tomorrow morning. A file proving that you were the one who forged the loan documents before you fled the country. Your signature is on the personal guarantor form, Sydney. You will go to federal prison and your fancy Swiss bank will fire you before you even unpack. They really thought they had me cornered. They believed their own lies so deeply that they forgot who actually built the company's entire digital infrastructure. Send me the equity transfer documents, I said evenly. I will review them when I land in Geneva. I ended the call before she could gloat. I took my first-class seat and ordered cold water. I opened my silver laptop one more time before takeoff. It was time to secure my hidden weapons. While my mother was busy drinking champagne and plotting my fake federal indictment, she had completely forgotten that I was a cybersecurity fanatic. I did not just have a basic alarm system at my penthouse. I had military-grade, cloud-syncing hidden cameras in every room connected to a private server. I logged into my secure portal. With a few keystrokes, I pulled up the high-definition footage from the past 72 hours. I found the exact timestamp from Tuesday afternoon. There was Bradley in my home office sweating profusely as he sat at my desk. The 4K camera angle perfectly captured him pulling the commercial loan documents out of his briefcase. I watched in crystal-clear resolution as my brother practiced forging my signature on a scrap piece of paper before signing the official bank guarantees. But video was not enough for federal court. I accessed my home network router logs. I downloaded the exact IP addresses, MAC addresses, and timestamps, showing Bradley's laptop connecting to my wireless network to upload the forged files to the American bank portal. It was an ironclad, indisputable digital footprint of federal wire fraud. I smiled, feeling completely calm. The flight attendant announced preparations for takeoff. I closed my laptop and safely stowed it beneath the seat in front of me. I had saved the encrypted folder to 3 separate offshore cloud drives. My family was busy celebrating a victory they had not won, armed with a threat that did not exist. They wanted to play a game of corporate extortion. They had no idea they were about to step into the arena with the very institution that now owned the deed to their entire lives and futures. The wheels of the aircraft touched down on the pristine runway at Geneva Airport. I gathered my belongings, stepping off the plane and into the crisp, cool air of Switzerland. The sleek, efficient architecture of the terminal was a sharp contrast to the chaotic, emotional mess I had left behind in the States. I walked toward the private car service that the bank had arranged for me, feeling a deep sense of calm settle over my shoulders. As I settled into the back seat of the black Mercedes sedan, I finally disabled airplane mode on my phone. Instantly, the screen lit up with a barrage of alerts. The most pressing was an urgent voice message from David, my attorney. I pressed play, listening as the Swiss countryside rolled past my window. Sydney. David said, his voice laced with anxiety. Your mother was not bluffing. She convened an emergency session of the logistics company board this morning. Using her majority shareholder voting power, she officially initiated an internal financial investigation against you. She used that corporate mandate to freeze every single one of your domestic bank accounts. You have no access to your American funds. Please call me back. A second notification popped up. It was an Instagram post from Jasmine, my sister-in-law. The photo showed her manicured hand holding the spare apartment keys I had tossed on the kitchen counter before I left. The caption read, "Moving into our new luxury penthouse today. So blessed to have family who steps up when times are tough. Time to redecorate." My mother and Jasmine truly believed they had won. They thought that by freezing my accounts and seizing my apartment, they had completely paralyzed me. They expected me to call them in a hysterical panic, crying and begging for access to my own money so I could survive in Europe. They expected me to surrender my 30% company equity just to make the nightmare stop. I did not argue with the void. I did not cry. Instead, sitting in the back of the luxurious sedan, I just smiled. My mother's grand tactical strike was entirely useless. What she did not realize was that I had anticipated her corporate overreach months ago. The domestic bank accounts she had just proudly frozen contained less than $800 in automated bill money. The vast majority of my wealth, my investments, and my savings had been legally transferred to secure offshore trusts weeks before I even signed my new employment contract. I opened Instagram and stared at Jasmine's smug photo of my keys. She was practically bragging about breaking and entering. I typed a brief comment under her post. Enjoy living with the real owner. I hit send, locked my phone, and slipped it into my blazer pocket. Jasmine would understand what those words meant by tomorrow morning, when the corporate leasing agency showed up with their own legal team and private security. The Mercedes pulled up to the towering glass headquarters of the Swiss investment bank. I stepped out, tipping the driver before walking through the massive revolving doors. I was not walking in as a victim of family betrayal. I was walking in as the newly appointed vice president of debt restructuring. The receptionist greeted me by name, handing me a sleek black security badge. I swiped myself through the executive turnstiles and took the private elevator straight to the 40th floor. My new corner office was breathtaking, featuring floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of Lake Geneva and the snow-capped Alps. But I did not spend any time admiring the scenery. I sat down in my leather ergonomic chair, booted up my dual monitors, and logged into the bank's secure global mainframe. It was time to do my job. I opened the internal database and typed in the corporate tax identification number for my family's logistics company. The file populated instantly. There it was, the $2 million commercial loan that Bradley had fraudulently secured using my forged signature. Because my bank was the parent company that had acquired this specific debt portfolio, I had total authorization over how it was managed. I opened the loan covenant. Bradley had already missed the first critical repayment window. Under standard operating procedure, the bank would usually send a polite warning letter and offer a 30-day grace period. But I was not feeling standard. I scrolled down to the punitive action menu. With 2 swift clicks, I bypassed the grace period entirely. I triggered the immediate default protocol, which automatically dispatched a foreclosure order to the American authorities, and flagged the forged loan for a federal financial audit. I pressed confirm. The screen flashed green. The cold departure was complete, and the avalanche had officially begun with no escape possible. I sat back. In my leather ergonomic chair, the green confirmation light reflecting off the tall glass windows of my Geneva office. The $2 million loan was officially in default. The trap had been sprung. Within seconds, my encrypted cell phone vibrated on the desk. It was David, my lawyer. Sydney. David said, his voice a mix of awe and disbelief. I was just monitoring the Federal Financial Registry. The commercial lender just flagged your brother's loan for immediate acceleration. The entire $2 million balance is due immediately, and the foreclosure proceedings on the family logistics company have been initiated. Did you do this? I am simply doing my job, David, I replied, keeping my tone entirely professional. The American subsidiary that issued Bradley the loan is now owned by my bank. He forged my signature to steal from my employer. The bank is simply protecting its assets. This is going to trigger a massive audit, David warned. When the federal investigators realize the signature on the personal guarantor forms does not match yours, they are going to look straight at Bradley. He is going to face federal wire fraud charges. That is exactly the point, I said calmly. Let me know when they serve the subpoenas. I ended the call and turned my attention back to my monitors. The financial avalanche was moving, but I knew my family would not go down quietly. They were entirely predictable. When cornered, they always resorted to public manipulation. Sure enough, less than an hour later, my phone began lighting up with notifications. The social media smear campaign had officially begun. I opened Instagram and saw that Jasmine had gone live. She was sitting in the living room of my penthouse, the very apartment she had unlawfully occupied. She was wearing designer clothes paid for with stolen funds, but she had expertly wiped away her makeup to look tired and distressed. She stared into the camera, letting out a perfectly timed, dramatic sob. "I am so sorry to come on here like this," Jasmine cried to her thousands of followers. "But my husband Bradley and I are going through an absolute nightmare. As many of you know, my husband's sister Sydney just abandoned the family business and moved to Europe. What we did not know was that she drained the company operating funds before she left. I watched in detached fascination as she spun a masterful web of lies. She claimed I was a greedy, vindictive woman who hated seeing my brother happy. She told her audience that I had maliciously frozen the company accounts to leave them destitute right before she planned to announce her pregnancy. The comments section flooded with outrage. Extended relatives, family friends, and complete strangers began leaving vicious messages calling me a sociopath, a criminal, and a disgrace to the family name. My phone started buzzing relentlessly with text messages from aunts and uncles I had not spoken to in years. Aunt Carol sent a long paragraph accusing me of breaking my mother's heart. Uncle George left a voicemail calling me a selfish brat who never appreciated the sacrifices the family made for my education. It was the classic golden child dynamic playing out on a public stage. Bradley was the untouchable victim, and I was the designated scapegoat meant to carry the weight of his failures. But their outrage meant absolutely nothing to me anymore. I did not type out angry replies. I did not post a defensive statement to clear my name. I simply took high-resolution screenshots of Jasmine's dramatic livestream and carefully archived every single abusive text message I received from my deeply misguided relatives. Every lie they posted online was just more evidence for the bank's legal team to use in the upcoming fraud trial. Just as Jasmine's live stream ended, an automated email popped up in my corporate inbox. The subject line read, "Urgent Emergency Logistics Company Shareholder Meeting." It was a formal summons sent by my mother Brenda. The meeting was scheduled for the following morning via video conference. The attached agenda was completely transparent. My mother was invoking an emergency corporate clause to formally terminate my employment in absentia, strip me of my minority shareholder voting rights, and legally assign the $2 million debt squarely onto my shoulders. She wanted to create a paper trail proving to the bank that I was the sole rogue actor responsible for the financial deficit. She was about to walk into a legal slaughterhouse. I quickly clicked accept on the calendar invitation. I poured myself a fresh cup of coffee, looking out over the serene waters of the lake. They wanted a corporate war, and tomorrow morning I was going to give them exactly what they asked for. The trap was locked. As the morning fog rolled off Lake Geneva, I settled deeper into my leather chair and opened a secondary, highly restricted application on my dual monitors. The emergency shareholder meeting was set for tomorrow morning, but I was not going to walk into that digital ambush unprepared. I needed to know exactly where every single cent of that $2 million fraudulent loan had gone. As a vice president of debt restructuring, I had full clearance to access the bank's forensic accounting software. I entered the loan identification number and initiated a deep dive trace on the dispersed funds. The results populated on my screen in a cascading waterfall of red flags and unauthorized wire transfers. The sheer audacity of my brother's financial incompetence was almost breathtaking. When the American subsidiary had disbursed the $2 million into the logistics company's primary operating account, Bradley had not kept it there to cover payroll, vendor invoices, or operational costs. Within 48 hours of the initial deposit, he had authorized a series of aggressive, irregular transfers to a web of offshore shell LLCs. I pulled up the dates of these transfers and cross-referenced them with the bank's communication logs. The timeline laid out a perfect story of absolute panic. Exactly 3 weeks ago, the American commercial lender had sent a standard automated notice to the logistics company, alerting them that an annual routine corporate audit would be conducted within 30 days. That was the exact same day Bradley had texted me saying he was quitting to figure things out. He was not taking a mental health break. He was not stressed by a toxic work environment. He had received the audit notice, realized the corporate accounts were completely hollowed out, and tried to abandon the sinking ship before the federal auditors showed up to check the books. He had planned to let the company collapse, let the bank seize my penthouse as collateral, and disappear with the stolen cash. I clicked on the first major shell company, an LLC registered in the state of Delaware. I pulled the tax identification numbers. The sole proprietor was Jasmine. I opened the ledger and watched a sickening display of gluttony unfold. Over the past 6 months, Jasmine had siphoned over $700,000 from this account to fund a lifestyle that rivaled a reality television star. There were massive wire transfers to luxury car dealerships for a customized white Range Rover. There were exorbitant payments to 5-star resorts in Dubai, the Maldives, and Paris. I saw receipts for private jet charters, tens of thousands of dollars spent at high-end jewelers, and the exact purchase order for the limited edition Hermes Birkin bag she had casually swung over her shoulder in my closet yesterday. She had been treating a commercial corporate loan like her own limitless personal debit card. But Jasmine was only half of the equation. I traced the remaining $1.3 million to Bradley's personal pet projects. My brother, the eternal golden child who believed he was a misunderstood business genius, had poured the stolen funds into a series of hilariously catastrophic side hustles. There was $250,000 dumped into a defunct cryptocurrency startup that had officially folded 3 months ago. Another $500,000 went to a phantom real estate development group in Florida that had never broken ground on a single property. The rest had been completely squandered on terrible day trading margins and bloated consulting fees paid to his college drinking buddies. I leaned back, taking another sip of my coffee. My mother Brenda had spent my entire life convincing everyone that Bradley was a visionary, destined to take the family business to unprecedented heights. She had forced me to do his homework in high school, write his college applications, and eventually build the financial infrastructure of the company he was supposed to lead. She had spent years quietly covering up his small mistakes, paying off his overdraft fees, and blaming me whenever profits dipped. But she could not cover up a $2 million federal deficit. She knew he had ruined the company, but her maternal delusion was so strong that she genuinely believed she could just sacrifice me to fix it. She honestly thought that by pinning the blame on me and freezing my meager domestic accounts, she could satisfy the bank and save her precious son from prison. She did not realize that I now possessed the exact ledger of his crimes. Every designer dress Jasmine bought, every failed crypto coin Bradley purchased, it was all permanently logged in the Swiss bank's federal database. I exported the entire forensic report into a single encrypted PDF file and saved it to my desktop. I named the file The Golden Child. Tomorrow morning I was going to share my screen on that Zoom call, and I was going to burn their entire illusion to the ground. I locked my computer screen and stood up to stretch my legs, the satisfaction of the audit settling in my chest. Just as I was reaching for my coat to leave the bank for the evening, my personal phone vibrated violently across the glass desk. A FaceTime call flashed on the screen. It was Jasmine. The timing was almost poetic. It was early afternoon back on the East Coast, prime time for her to be out socializing. I tapped accept, curious to see what desperate angle she was playing now. The screen instantly filled with blinding sunshine and the loud, unmistakable chatter of a high society outdoor brunch. Jasmine was sitting at a large patio table under a white cabana. I recognized the sprawling green lawns immediately. It was the elite Crestview Country Club, a place with a $50,000 initiation fee. Jasmine was wearing a designer silk blouse and holding a crystal champagne flute. Around her sat half a dozen wealthy, influential women from our hometown, the exact demographic my mother and Jasmine constantly tried to impress. "Sydney," Jasmine wailed the second the connection stabilized, her voice artificially loud and laced with dramatic panic. "I cannot believe you are answering. We are all so incredibly worried about you. Why are you dodging our calls?" Several of the women at the table turned to look at the phone screen, their faces painted with manufactured sympathy. Jasmine knew exactly what she was doing. She was using her audience to corner me, painting herself as the desperate, caring family member while framing me as the villain. I kept my expression entirely blank, sitting back down in my leather chair. "I am at work, Jasmine. What do you want?" Jasmine let out a perfectly timed, shaky breath, dabbing the corner of her eye with a linen napkin. You left Bradley in such a terrible state. You know he is struggling to keep the family company afloat, and now we find out you are hiding the company operating funds in European bank accounts. It is just so selfish, Sydney. We are family. Bradley is losing sleep because of the financial mess you left behind. She was putting on an Oscar-worthy performance and her wealthy friends were eating it up. They were shaking their heads, whispering to each other about my supposed cruelty. Jasmine was actively spending stolen money on champagne while publicly accusing me of embezzlement. Before I could respond, the camera violently jerked. My mother, Brenda, leaned into the frame, effectively shoving Jasmine out of the way. Brenda's face was tight with a mixture of rage and arrogant authority. She did not care about the country club audience. She only cared about control. You listen to me right now, Sydney. Brenda hissed, her voice low and venomous. Your brother had to make some very difficult financial maneuvers to save the logistics company from the absolute disaster you created. The bank is being completely unreasonable about the debt, but we can fix this. I have my corporate lawyers drafting a document right now. You are going to sign over your 30% equity in the company to Bradley. We will use your shares to pacify the bank and restructure the loan. And what happens if I refuse your generous offer? I asked, keeping my voice perfectly flat and devoid of any emotion. Brenda sneered, her eyes narrowing into cold slits. If you refuse, I am submitting a complete file to the FBI tomorrow morning. A file proving that you were the one who forged the commercial loan documents before you fled the country. Your signature is on the personal guarantor form, Sydney. We have copies. If you do not give Bradley your shares, you will go to federal prison, and your fancy Swiss bank will fire you before you even finish unpacking your bags. They really thought they had me backed into an inescapable corner. They believed their own lies so deeply that they forgot who actually built the company's entire digital infrastructure. They were threatening me with the very same forged documents that I was already using to dismantle their lives. I looked at my mother's furious face on the screen, then glanced at the encrypted PDF file named The Golden Child, resting on my desktop. I did not raise my voice. I did not defend myself to Jasmine's eavesdropping friends. Have the equity transfer documents ready for the Zoom meeting tomorrow morning, I said evenly. I will review them when everyone is present. I ended the call before she could gloat. They wanted a public execution, but they were the ones standing on the trap door. I grabbed my heavy coat. Walking out of the bank and into the crisp Geneva evening, I felt absolutely untouchable. Tomorrow morning would change everything. The crisp Geneva evening air was refreshing against my face as I walked the short distance from the bank headquarters to my new corporate apartment. My company had provided a stunning flat overlooking the Rhone River, a world away from the toxic, suffocating atmosphere of my family home in America. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and tossed my heavy coat onto a plush armchair. I did not bother turning on the main lights. The soft glow of the city filtering through the windows was enough. I walked straight to the dining table, opened my laptop, and began the final preparations for tomorrow. They wanted an emergency shareholder meeting. I was going to give them an execution. I opened the encrypted folder on my desktop. I had already downloaded the security footage from my penthouse while I was traveling, but now it was time to arm the weapon. I needed to construct a digital presentation so airtight that not even my mother's world-class manipulation could find a crack in it. I opened a new presentation file and titled it Shareholder Review. It was a perfectly boring corporate title for a document that was about to send my brother to federal prison. On the first slide, I embedded the 4K video and audio files from my home security cameras. I played the footage back one more time, making sure the audio was perfectly synchronized. The clarity was flawless. Jasmine's voice echoed through my quiet apartment as she casually claimed my Hermes bag and announced they were taking over my Porsche. Bradley's arrogant scoff was crystal clear as he demanded to use my home because he was stressed from the family company. I set the video to autoplay the moment the slide advanced. There would be no denying their intent. They were not visiting. They were occupying a property they thought they had legally stolen. For the second slide, I imported the network router logs. This was the undeniable digital fingerprint of Bradley's federal wire fraud. I highlighted the exact IP addresses, the MAC address of Bradley's personal laptop, and the precise timestamps showing his device connecting to my wireless network. I placed these logs side by side with the timestamp of the forged loan documents being submitted to the American bank portal. The times matched down to the exact second. He had sat in my home office and committed a felony using my internet connection, completely unaware that my cybersecurity setup logged every single packet of data transmitted through the router. Slide 3 was the financial kill shot. I took the forensic audit I had compiled at the bank earlier that day and distilled it into a single brutal pie chart. It broke down exactly where the $2 million had gone. $700,000 to Jasmine's offshore shell company in Delaware, $500,000 to Phantom Real Estate, $250,000 to dead cryptocurrency. I attached the receipts for Jasmine's luxury cars and Dubai vacations. I wanted the board of directors to see exactly what they were paying for when my mother demanded they seize my equity to cover the debt. With the presentation fully armed, I picked up my phone and dialed David, my attorney, back in the States. He answered immediately, sounding exhausted but alert. "David, I have a package for you," I said smoothly. "I am sending you a secure link to a presentation. I need you to have it ready tomorrow morning. Also, I need you to contact the federal authorities and the Commercial Fraud Division first thing. Tell them the Vice President of Debt Restructuring at the Swiss bank has ironclad proof of identity theft and wire fraud regarding the logistics company loan." I can hear David taking a sharp breath on the other end of the line. "You are really doing this, Sydney. You are pulling the trigger on your own brother." "He pulled the trigger when he forged my name," I corrected him, my voice completely void of sympathy. "I am just making sure the bullet hits the right target. Be ready to forward the files to the FBI the moment I give you the signal during the Zoom call tomorrow." "Understood," David replied, his tone shifting from hesitant to strictly professional. "I will have the federal agents on standby." I ended the call, closed my laptop, and walked into the kitchen to pour myself a glass of cold water. My phone was still occasionally lighting up with hateful text messages from extended relatives, fueled by Jasmine's fake tears and my mother's lies. I did not read a single one. I drank my water, went to my bedroom, and climbed into the crisp, clean sheets. While my family spent the night celebrating my fabricated downfall and planning how to spend my corporate equity, I closed my eyes and fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. Tomorrow, the golden child was going to fall. The morning sun pierced through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my Geneva apartment, pulling me from a deep sleep. I woke up feeling completely energized. Today was the day I stepped into the hot shower, letting the water wash away any lingering traces of jet lag. I dressed with meticulous care, choosing a tailored charcoal gray power suit and a crisp white silk blouse. I pulled my hair back into a sleek professional bun. When I looked in the mirror, I did not see the scapegoat my mother had spent decades trying to break. I saw the vice president of debt restructuring for one of the most powerful financial institutions in Europe. I left my apartment and took the short walk to the bank headquarters. The crisp Swiss air was invigorating. I swiped my security badge and walked into the massive glass lobby, the polished marble floors echoing with the quiet hum of international finance. Taking the private elevator up to the 40th floor, I stepped into my expansive office. The panoramic view of the lake and the Alps was stunning, but my focus was entirely on the dual monitors resting on my mahogany desk. I sat down and logged into the secure mainframe. Right at the top of my inbox was a high-priority encrypted email from the global CEO of the bank, Director Weber. He was a notoriously ruthless Swiss financier who valued brutal efficiency over everything else. I opened the message. Sydney, Director Weber wrote, "I have reviewed the accelerated default protocol you initiated yesterday regarding the American logistics company portfolio. Our legal team has verified the digital forensic evidence you attached regarding the forged signatures and the wire fraud. The audacity of this individual to defraud our newly acquired American subsidiary is staggering. Consider this email, your official executive authorization. You have absolute unilateral control over this specific debt file. You are hereby authorized to act as the primary agent of collection and foreclosure. Show them exactly how we handle financial parasites. I read the words twice, feeling a cold smile form on my lips. The massive twist that my family could never have possibly anticipated was now locked in with executive backing. They thought they were dealing with some faceless automated banking system back in America. They thought they could just bully me into giving up my 30% equity to pacify a random loan officer. They had absolutely no idea that the Swiss investment bank I now worked for was the exact entity that had bought out their $2 million debt. I was not just an employee, I was effectively their personal debt collector, backed by a multi-billion-dollar global empire. I replied to Director Weber, thanking him for the authorization and confirming that the recovery process was already in motion. I then forwarded his email to David, my attorney in the States, telling him we were fully cleared to involve the federal authorities the moment I gave the word. I glanced at the digital clock on the corner of my monitor. It was almost time. The emergency shareholder meeting was scheduled to begin in 15 minutes. I unplugged my laptop from the docking station and carried it down the hall to a soundproof executive conference room. I wanted the audio and video quality to be absolutely perfect for my family. I set my laptop on the long glass table, connected it to the massive wall-mounted monitor, and adjusted the high-definition webcam. I opened the Zoom link my mother had sent the day before. The waiting room screen popped up, indicating that the host had not yet started the meeting. I sat back in the ergonomic chair, steepling my fingers. I could perfectly imagine the scene back in America. My mother was probably pacing around her living room, barking orders. Jasmine was likely sitting right next to Bradley, holding his hand and whispering how brave he was for facing his cruel sister. They were probably reviewing the legal documents they planned to force me to sign, entirely confident in their fabricated leverage. They thought they held all the cards. They thought freezing my domestic bank accounts had left me helpless. They were completely wrong. My phone buzzed softly on the glass table. It was a text from David. Federal agents are fully briefed and on standby. We are just waiting for your signals, Sydney. I replied with a single word. Ready? Let the games begin, I whispered to myself. But my mother? Brenda was predictably petty. She intentionally left me sitting in the digital waiting room of the video conference. It was a classic power play designed to make me feel small and anxious before the execution. She wanted me to sweat. She wanted me to sit in silence and think about the consequences of defying her. But the silence in my Geneva office was abruptly shattered by my personal cell phone vibrating off the glass table. It was not a message from the bank or my lawyer. It was a massive wave of notifications cascading down my screen. I picked up the device and saw that I was being tagged in dozens of posts. Jasmine had just unleashed her ultimate weapon. Knowing the shareholder meeting was about to happen, she had orchestrated a highly produced live broadcast to control the public narrative and paint me into an inescapable corner. I clicked on the notification and Jasmine's face filled my screen. She was sitting in the nursery of my penthouse, the very room I had planned to convert into a home gym. She had strategically positioned herself in front of a freshly assembled white crib. She was no longer wearing her designer silk blouses or diamond tennis bracelets. Instead, she wore an oversized plain gray sweater, her hair tied back. She looked directly into the camera and let out a breathless, trembling sob that would have won an Academy Award. I did not want to share this news under these horrific circumstances, Jasmine cried, wiping a perfectly placed tear from her cheek. But my husband Bradley and I are expecting our first child. We should be overjoyed right now. We should be celebrating the future of our family. But instead, we are living in a nightmare of absolute terror because of my sister-in-law, Sydney. I watched in cold, detached fascination as she spun a masterful web of emotional manipulation. She held up a sonogram photo to the camera, her hand shaking violently. She claimed that the stress of my supposed corporate embezzlement was causing dangerous complications with her pregnancy. She told her thousands of followers that I had maliciously drained the family company accounts and fled to Europe specifically to leave my unborn niece or nephew destitute. She painted herself as a struggling, terrified mother-to-be and framed me as a wealthy, cruel sociopath who was actively trying to destroy an innocent child. "Please, Sydney," Jasmine begged, staring directly into the lens, her voice cracking with manufactured desperation. "If you are watching this, keep the money. Keep your fancy European job. Just give us back the company so Bradley can provide for his baby. Do not punish an innocent child for your own greed." The broadcast ended and the fallout was instantaneous. My phone practically caught fire with the sheer volume of vitriol pouring in from extended family members. The flying monkeys had been fully activated. These were aunts, uncles, and cousins who had not bothered to call me on my birthday in over a decade, but they were suddenly fiercely invested in my complete destruction. Aunt Beatrice sent a massive paragraph accusing me of trying to cause a miscarriage. "You are a monster, Sydney," she wrote. "Your brother is going to be a father and you are trying to leave him homeless. How do you sleep at night knowing you are starving your own flesh and blood? You are dead to this family." Cousin Thomas left a blistering voicemail screaming into the phone. He called me an arrogant corporate elitist who forgot where she came from. He demanded that I wire the stolen funds back to Bradley immediately, or he would personally fly to Switzerland and drag me back to face the police. Dozens of other messages echoed the exact same sentiment. They called me heartless, selfish, and deeply disturbed. They demanded apologies, they demanded restitution, and they promised to ruin my reputation if I did not surrender. Jasmine had successfully weaponized the entire extended family against me using a pregnancy as an impenetrable shield. Any normal person would have been crushed under the weight of that collective hatred. Any normal person would have panicked, deleted their social media accounts, and begged for forgiveness just to make the relentless harassment stop. But I was not normal, and I was not intimidated. I took high-resolution screenshots of Jasmine's broadcast and archived every single abusive text message. I forwarded the entire batch of digital evidence directly to my lawyer, David. Jasmine thought a sonogram photo gave her a free pass to commit federal wire fraud and defamation. She was about to learn that the Swiss bank did not care about her fake tears. Suddenly, the waiting room vanished. The stark gray interface of the Zoom conference call materialized on my primary monitor, expanding to fill the screen. A grid of digital windows appeared displaying the board of directors for the family logistics company. At the very center of the grid was my mother, Brenda, sitting at the head of the massive mahogany conference table back at the corporate headquarters. To her right sat Bradley, wearing a sharply tailored navy blue suit that he had undoubtedly purchased with stolen funds. Next to him was Jasmine, no longer playing the weeping makeup-free victim from her social media broadcast. She was back in full high society armor, wearing a crisp white blazer and a defiant smirk. While my mother fumbled with the microphone settings, complaining to the IT guy off camera, my personal phone vibrated one last time. I glanced down at the screen. The barrage of text messages from my extended relatives was still rolling in, fueled by Jasmine's manipulative pregnancy announcement. As I scrolled through the final dozen messages, a perfect unintentional documentary of my family's toxic dynamic unfolded right there in my notifications. Aunt Diane had sent a scathing paragraph. "You have always been insanely jealous of your brother Sydney. Even back in 2018 when Bradley had that minor accident with the delivery fleet, you complained about having to work weekends to fix the insurance paperwork. He is a visionary. He takes risks. You are just a number cruncher who never understood his genius. You should be grateful he even let you work at his company." I stared at the words, feeling a familiar cold detachment. Aunt Diane's version of a minor accident was Bradley getting a DUI in a commercial company truck, destroying a warehouse loading dock, and nearly bankrupting us. I had spent 18 months working 90-hour weeks, negotiating with insurance adjusters, and completely rebuilding the company's financial routing from scratch just to keep the business afloat. Bradley's punishment from our mother was a 2-week paid vacation to the Bahamas to recover from the stress of the incident. A message from Uncle Paul popped up next. Your brother has the charisma, Sydney. He is the face of the brand. All you did was sit in the back office and type on a computer. Now that he is going to be a father, he needs the equity to secure his legacy. Stop being a selfish brat and hand over the shares. He earned them. Uncle Paul was conveniently forgetting that before I took over the back office, the company was using paper ledgers and was 3 months behind on payroll. I had personally coded the entire enterprise resource planning software. I had automated the logistics tracking, secured the vendor contracts, and single-handedly built the financial infrastructure that allowed Bradley to call himself a CEO. Bradley did not know how to run a balance sheet. He did not know how to process payroll. His entire job consisted of taking clients to expensive steak dinners and claiming credit for the quarterly profit margins I had aggressively optimized. The messages continued, each one reinforcing the same delusional narrative. To them, Bradley was the golden child, a brilliant but misunderstood entrepreneur who just needed one more loan, one more bailout, or one more chance to strike it rich. I was just the scapegoat, the designated workhorse, whose only purpose was to clean up his messes, fund his lifestyle, and absorb the blame whenever his reckless gambles inevitably failed. They genuinely believed that because I was the daughter, my labor was an obligation, while his existence was a triumph. I turned my phone on silent and placed it face down on the glass desk. Their texts were not hurtful anymore. They were simply validating. They proved that there was nothing left in that family worth saving. They had built an entire ecosystem of enablement around Bradley, and they were completely willing to throw me to the wolves to keep their fragile illusion intact. All right, can everyone hear me now? My mother's voice suddenly boomed through the high-definition speakers in my office. The IT guy gave a thumbs up and stepped out of the frame. Brenda cleared her throat, her expression hardening into a mask of pure corporate authority. She looked directly into the camera lens, her eyes locking onto my digital window. I hear you perfectly, Mom, I replied, my voice calm, level, and echoing with the quiet power of a woman who held all the cards. I am calling this emergency shareholder meeting to order, Brenda announced, ignoring my casual greeting. The primary objective today is to address the catastrophic financial deficit caused by our former executive, Sydney. Bradley leaned forward, crossing his arms with a smug expression, fully prepared to watch me take the fall. The silence in the virtual room was palpable as Brenda's opening statement hung in the air. Besides my mother, Bradley, and Jasmine, 4 other board members were on the call. These were older men, legacy investors who had been friends with my late father. They were businessmen who rarely questioned my mother's authority, preferring to collect their dividend checks while staying out of the day-to-day operations. Now they looked uncomfortable, staring at their webcams with grave expressions. Brenda did not waste a single second. She shared her screen, bringing up a highly redacted version of the logistics company's recent bank statements. The numbers were manipulated, but the final deficit was glaringly obvious. $2 million had evaporated from the primary operating fund. As you can all see, Brenda continued, her voice dripping with manufactured disappointment. We are facing a severe crisis. 3 weeks ago, Sydney abruptly resigned as our chief financial officer. She claimed she was pursuing a new opportunity in Europe. However, immediately following her departure, our accounting department uncovered this massive discrepancy. A $2 million commercial loan was taken out against our corporate assets. Mr. Peterson, an elderly board member with a thick white mustache, leaned closer to his camera. Brenda, are you suggesting Sydney stole this money? I am not suggesting it, Richard. Brenda replied, shaking her head sadly. I am stating it as an indisputable fact. Sydney had exclusive control over the corporate routing numbers and the digital infrastructure. She was the only one with the technical capability to authorize a loan of this magnitude without triggering internal warnings. She secured the funds, transferred them to unknown offshore accounts, and fled the country. Jasmine reached over and placed a comforting hand on Bradley's shoulder. Bradley looked down at the table, playing the part of the betrayed brother perfectly. This is a profound betrayal of family and corporate trust, Brenda declared, her tone growing colder and more authoritative. The American lender has already issued a notice of default. They are threatening foreclosure on our primary distribution centers. If we do not act immediately, this company will be bankrupt by the end of the month. I sat in my Geneva office sipping my dark coffee and watching the twisted performance unfold. It was genuinely impressive how easily my mother lied. She spoke with such conviction that if I did not have the secure router logs proving Bradley committed the fraud, I might have almost believed her myself. I leaned back in my leather chair and carefully studied the anxious expressions on the faces of the board members. They were terrified of losing their personal investments. My mother knew exactly how to weaponize their financial fears to achieve her own deeply selfish goals. "So what is the proposed solution?" asked Mr. Mitchell, another board member adjusting his glasses. "We cannot simply conjure $2 million out of thin air." Brenda smiled a tight, predatory expression. "We do not have to. Sydney currently holds a 30% equity stake in this company. As majority shareholder, I have called this emergency meeting to propose a binding resolution. We will formally terminate Sydney for gross misconduct and financial sabotage. Under the corporate malfeasance clause in our bylaws, we have the right to forcefully seize her shares as restitution. We will then liquidate that 30% equity and use the capital to pay off the bank." It was the perfect crime in her eyes. She would wipe out Bradley's massive debt, save her precious son from federal prison, and completely strip me of the financial legacy I had spent a decade building. Best of all, she would look like the heroic savior of the company in front of the board. "And what about the criminal aspect?" Richard asked, his brow furrowed. "If she stole $2 million, shouldn't we be involving the authorities?" Brenda let out a heavy, dramatic sigh. "She is still my daughter, Richard. Bradley and I discussed this at length. If the board votes to seize her equity to cover the deficit, we will handle this matter internally. We will not press criminal charges. We just want to move on and rebuild the company without her toxic influence." It was a brilliant psychological trap. By pretending to show me mercy, Brenda painted herself as a compassionate mother forced to make a difficult business decision. The board members nodded in unison, clearly relieved that they would not have to deal with a messy public FBI investigation. "I am putting the motion to a vote right now," Brenda announced, her eyes finally flicking back to my digital window. "A formal motion to terminate Sydney with cause and legally seize her equity. All in favor?" I did not interrupt. I just smiled softly and watched her dig the hole deeper. Before the board members could even raise their hands to vote, Bradley leaned closer to his webcam, resting his elbows on the mahogany table. He hung his head, letting out a ragged, perfectly rehearsed sigh. He was ready for his solo performance. "I would like to say something before we finalize this," Bradley said, his voice thick with fake emotion. He looked up, and I could actually see the artificial tears glistening in the corners of his eyes. Jasmine rubbed his back in slow, soothing circles, playing the supportive wife to absolute perfection. "This entire situation is my fault," Bradley continued, his voice cracking slightly. "I am the chief executive officer of this family business. It was my responsibility to monitor the financial infrastructure. But Sydney is my little sister. I trusted her implicitly. I was so focused on expanding our client base and keeping our drivers employed that I completely missed the warning signs of her greed. I never imagined she would use the system she built to rob us blind." He paused, wiping a stray tear from his cheek. It was a masterclass in gaslighting. He was simultaneously taking fake accountability while entirely blaming me for a crime he committed. "I knew she was unhappy," Bradley went on, shaking his head. "She always resented the fact that our father wanted me to lead the company. She felt she was owed more money, more recognition. But to take $2 million and abandon us, knowing it could bankrupt the legacy our father built, it just breaks my heart. And now, my wife and our unborn child are facing a future of financial ruin because of my blind trust in my own flesh and blood." The older board members were practically eating out of his hand. Mr. Peterson pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and dabbed at his forehead. Mr. Mitchell nodded sympathetically, murmuring words of support. They saw a young, passionate family man who had been viciously betrayed by a bitter, calculating sister. They did not see the man who had just blown $250,000 on dead cryptocurrency and bought his wife a white Range Rover with stolen corporate debt. "Thank you for your honesty, Bradley," Brenda said softly, reaching out to squeeze his hand. "We know how much this hurts you, but as executives, we have to protect the company and its employees. We cannot let one person's malicious actions destroy everything." Brenda sat up completely straight, her soft, maternal facade instantly hardening back into a ruthless corporate mask. She turned her attention back to the screen, her eyes locking onto my silent, smiling face. "The time for debate is over," Brenda announced, her voice echoing sharply through the boardroom and my Geneva office. "As the majority shareholder holding 51% of the voting power, I am officially calling the motion to a vote. The resolution is to immediately terminate Sydney for gross financial misconduct, strip her of her corporate titles, and legally seize her 30% equity stake in this logistics company. The equity will be liquidated and transferred to the primary operating account to satisfy the $2 million commercial loan default." She looked around this boardroom table, making eye contact with each of the legacy investors. "All those in favor of the resolution, raise your hand and say, 'Aye.'" One by one the hands went up. Mr. Peterson raised his hand. "Aye." Mr. Mitchell raised his hand. "Aye." Two other silent board members raised their hands in unison. "Aye." Finally, Brenda raised her own hand, looking directly into the camera with a triumphant, vindictive smirk. "Aye." The motion passes unanimously. "Sydney, effective immediately, you are stripped of all ties to this company. Your shares are now property of the corporate trust. The legal paperwork will be filed with the state registry by the end of the business day." Jasmine let out a loud, dramatic sigh of relief, leaning her head on Bradley's shoulder. Bradley smiled, a genuine expression of pure, unadulterated greed finally breaking through his fake tears. They had done it. In their minds, they had just executed the perfect corporate coup. They had erased $2 million of federal wire fraud, stolen my entire financial legacy, and secured their luxurious lifestyle, all with a simple raise of their hands. They were waiting for me to scream. They were waiting for me to cry, beg, or threaten to sue them. They wanted to watch me break down on camera, totally defeated by their combined family power. I took a very slow, deliberate sip of my dark roast coffee, enjoying the absolute silence in my office. I placed the ceramic mug down on the glass desk. I leaned forward, resting my hands on the keyboard, and finally unmuted my microphone. "That was a very touching performance, Bradley," I said, my voice cutting cleanly through the celebratory chatter in the boardroom. The smiles on my family members' faces froze instantly. Brenda glared at the camera. "You are no longer an employee of this company, Sydney," she snapped. "You do not have the floor to speak. Disconnect from this call immediately, before I have IT permanently block your IP address. I am not dialing in as an employee." "Mom," I replied conversationally. "And I am not dialing in as a minority shareholder either. Your unanimous board resolution to seize my equity is completely void. It is legally impossible to confiscate assets that no longer belong to you." The boardroom fell dead silent. Mr. Peterson leaned closer to his microphone. "What do you mean they do not belong to you, Sydney? Your name is on the founding charter." I smiled, sharing my secondary screen to display the legal documents. "My name was on the charter, Richard, but 6 months ago I conducted a private transfer of assets. I saw exactly where Bradley was taking this company. I saw the reckless spending and the impending collapse. So I cashed out. I sold my entire 30% equity stake to an international private equity firm." Brenda slammed her fist on the table. "That is a lie. We would have been notified. The bylaws dictate family shares must be offered internally first." "And they were," I countered smoothly, pulling up a digital read receipt. "I sent the formal buyout offer to Bradley's corporate email address on October 14th. He never opened it because he was too busy vacationing in Aspen with Jasmine. After 30 days of zero response, I was legally free to sell to a third party. The transaction cleared months ago. Bradley swallowed hard, losing all his color. He looked like a man who just stepped on a landmine. "Who did you sell it to?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. I advanced to the next slide. The intimidating logo of my Swiss investment bank filled their boardroom monitors. I sold my shares to the European parent company of the exact commercial lender you just defrauded, Bradley, I said, leaning closer to my webcam. I am not here to defend myself against fabricated accusations. I am here representing my employer. I am the Vice President of Debt Restructuring for the financial institution that now owns your $2 million loan and, by extension, your entire company. Absolute, unadulterated chaos erupted on the Zoom call. Mr. Mitchell stood up so fast his heavy leather chair crashed backward to the floor. "What is she talking about, Bradley? What fraud?" I did not give my brother a second to invent a lie. I clicked to the next slide, displaying the router logs, the hidden camera footage of Bradley practicing my signature, and the forensic audit showing stolen money wired directly to Jasmine's offshore accounts. While you were voting to fire me, I announced over the rising panic my executive team in Geneva finalized an accelerated default protocol. Bradley did not take out a legitimate loan. He forged my signature on guarantor forms, committed federal wire fraud, and funneled $2 million into his wife's shell companies to buy luxury cars and fund their extravagant lifestyle. Jasmine let out a sharp gasp, covering her mouth. Her fake pregnancy tears were useless against federal banking logs. The board members began shouting, demanding answers, threatening lawsuits, and pointing fingers at my mother. Brenda looked faint. She grabbed Bradley's arm, shaking him violently. "Tell them she is lying, Bradley. Tell them it is a fake document she manufactured to ruin us." But Bradley could not speak. He stared at the security footage of himself sitting at my desk, committing a federal felony. He knew I had him dead to rights. Because Bradley used the corporate entity to execute this fraud, the bank is holding the entire company liable. I added, my voice cutting through the screaming. "Do not worry about fixing the debt, Mom. Since the bank already owns my former equity, they are simply triggering a hostile takeover to absorb the rest of the company to satisfy the default." Richard Peterson grabbed his briefcase, his face purple with rage. "I am calling my lawyers right now, Brenda. I am holding you and your son personally responsible for every penny I lose." He stormed out of the boardroom, followed closely by the other legacy investors. My mother was left sitting alone at the head of the table, flanked by her terrified golden child and her panicking daughter-in-law. I sat back in my chair, finally enjoying the spectacular view. I sat back down in my chair, finally enjoying the spectacular view. The boardroom on my monitor was descending into absolute pandemonium. Brenda was physically blocking the conference room door, desperately begging the board members to stay and listen to reason. She practically screamed that it was a massive misunderstanding, a corporate glitch that could be smoothed over with a few phone calls. But her words fell on deaf ears. The legacy investors were not fools. They had just seen undeniable forensic evidence of a federal felony, and they were scrambling to distance themselves from the blast radius. Bradley was still frozen in his seat, staring blankly at the webcam. The smug, arrogant CEO mask he had worn for years had completely melted away, leaving behind the pale, terrified face of a man who suddenly realized he had dug his own grave. For his entire life, Bradley had operated under the delusion that actions did not have real consequences. If he crashed a car, our mother paid the insurance deductible. If he lost a major client, she blamed the sales team. He honestly believed that forging my signature was just another minor family dispute, a clever little trick that Brenda would somehow sweep under the rug once the dust settled. But the reality of his situation was finally crashing down on him. He had not committed fraud against his younger sister. He had actually committed federal wire fraud against a massive international commercial banking institution. He had falsified commercial loan documents across state and international lines. He had funneled stolen corporate funds into offshore shell accounts to evade taxes. These were not family matters that could be resolved with a forced apology over Thanksgiving dinner. These were severe federal crimes carrying mandatory prison sentences. The Swiss bank did not care who his mother was. They did not care about his golden child status. To them, he was just a financial parasite, and they had the unlimited legal resources to crush him into dust. Jasmine was violently shaking Bradley by the shoulder, demanding action, but he just buried his face in his hands. I leaned forward, resting my arms on the glass desk. "Good luck with the federal auditors, Bradley," I said quietly, cutting through the noise one last time. "I suggest you use whatever money you have left to hire a very good defense attorney." I clicked the red button at the bottom of the screen, abruptly ending the Zoom call and severing my connection to the company forever. The silence that filled my Geneva office was incredibly satisfying. My encrypted phone vibrated almost immediately. It was David. I just received the frantic emails from Richard Peterson and the other board members. David reported, his voice tight with adrenaline. "They are officially stepping down from the board and filing civil suits against your mother and brother. The corporate implosion is happening faster than we predicted. Have you notified the authorities yet?" I asked, pulling up the bank's internal tracking software. "The federal agents have everything," David confirmed. "The router logs, the video footage, the financial trace. Because the loan was accelerated into default, the legal team just filed the formal criminal complaint. The FBI has officially opened a wire fraud investigation. They are securing the warrants right now." "Perfect," I replied, turning my attention to my secondary monitor. "Keep me updated on their movements." I hung up the phone and opened my social media feed. Jasmine had clearly realized the gravity of the situation as well. Just an hour ago, she had been weeping on a live broadcast, playing the tragic victim to thousands of sympathetic followers. Now her profile was a frantic blur of digital backpedaling. She was aggressively deleting her previous videos, removing photos of her luxury shopping sprees, and wiping any mention of the company from her biography. She thought she could erase the evidence by simply scrubbing her digital footprint. But the internet never forgets, and federal investigators certainly do not. I already archived every post, every flaunted designer purchase, and every defamatory claim she made against me. Her desperate attempt to clean up her image was futile. The stolen money was already sitting in her offshore shell company, and the digital paper trail was permanently locked in the federal database. My mother attempted to call my personal phone 3 times. I watched her name flash across the screen, imagining her sheer panic. She had spent my entire life controlling the narrative and punishing me whenever I stepped out of line. Now she was entirely powerless. She could not manipulate a Swiss bank or gaslight the FBI. She could not protect her golden child from the devastating consequences of his greed. I did not answer her calls. I blocked her number and returned to my work. I had barely finished reviewing my afternoon briefs when the sleek multi-line phone on my desk began flashing red. It was an external call being routed through the main corporate reception desk downstairs. I pressed the speaker button. "Vice President's office." I answered professionally. "Sydney." The voice that exploded through the speaker was so loud and shrill it actually startled me. It was my mother, Brenda. Since I had blocked her personal cell phone, she had desperately looked up the public directory for the Swiss investment bank and harassed the receptionists until someone transferred her to my extension. "Sydney, you have to stop this right now!" Brenda screamed, her voice completely stripped of its usual arrogant authority. I could hear chaotic background noise, heavy footsteps, and a man's voice shouting orders. "They are here. There are police cars on my front lawn. Call your bosses right now and tell them it is a mistake." I leaned back in my leather chair, steepling my fingers. "Who is there, Mom?" "The FBI." She shrieked, her breath coming in ragged, panicked gasps. "There are 3 black SUVs parked in the driveway. Local police are standing on the porch. They just broke down the front door because Bradley would not open it. Sydney, they put your brother in handcuffs. They shoved him against the dining room wall and told him he is being served with a federal subpoena for wire fraud and corporate embezzlement. You need to call them off." "I cannot call off the Federal Bureau of Investigation." "Mom, I said smoothly, taking a sip of my water. They do not work for my bank. They work for the United States Department of Justice. Bradley committed a federal felony. He is your brother. Brenda wailed, the sound of tearing paper echoing through the line as agents likely tore through her filing cabinets. This was just a family dispute. We were going to pay the bank back. Tell your CEO that we will sign over the company. Just tell the agents to let him go. They are treating him like a violent criminal. He is a criminal, I corrected her, feeling no sympathy for the tears she was finally shedding. And he did not steal from me. He stole from a multi-billion-dollar international entity. When you steal $2 million across state lines using forged digital signatures, the federal government tends to take it very personally. There is no family discount for corporate fraud. Sydney, please. Brenda begged, her voice dropping to a desperate whimper. Jasmine is hyperventilating on the couch. The agents are boxing up my computer, my financial records, everything. They just handed me a notice. They froze the company operating accounts. They froze my personal checking account. I cannot even buy groceries. Sydney, let alone hire a defense attorney for your brother. You have to fix this. You initiated a hostile boardroom vote to fire me and seize my equity just 2 hours ago. I reminded her, keeping my tone perfectly conversational. You told Richard Peterson and the other board members that I was the rogue actor. You were completely prepared to watch the FBI raid my apartment and drag me away in handcuffs to protect your golden child. The only difference is that the agents are currently at the correct address. I am your mother, she screamed, the desperation turning back into furious entitlement. You owe us. You cannot just sit in Europe and watch your family be destroyed. I am not destroying you, Mom, I said quietly. I am just refusing to be your human shield anymore. You built a world where Bradley never had to face the consequences of his actions. You enabled his incompetence and funded his greed. Now the real world has finally caught up with him. Have a good afternoon. Do not you dare hang up on me, Sydney, Brenda shrieked. Tell your bosses to drop the charges right now, or I swear I will make you pay for this. I reached forward and pressed the disconnect button, cutting her threat off instantly. The office returned to its peaceful, luxurious silence. I looked out the window at the snow-capped mountains in the distance. The raid was happening exactly as David had orchestrated. By freezing the company accounts and her personal assets, the federal agents had effectively paralyzed them. They could not wire money to Jasmine's offshore accounts. They could not liquidate assets to pay for a high-powered legal defense team. They were entirely trapped in the financial prison they had built for me. The golden child was finally experiencing the crushing weight of reality, and the enabler who had protected him was powerless to stop it. This was the absolute justice that my entire family had spent decades trying to escape. I let out a long breath and turned my chair toward the window, watching the sunset paint the sky over Lake Geneva in shades of deep purple and gold. The chaotic raid back in America was over, and the freezing of their assets was absolute. My corporate phone remained silent for the rest of the evening, but my personal cell phone buzzed to life just as I was pouring a glass of red wine. I glanced at the screen, expecting another hysterical voicemail from my mother, Brenda. Instead, the caller ID displayed a number I had not seen light up my screen in months. It was Jasmine. I set my wine glass down on the marble kitchen island. The timing was impeccable. The federal agents had barely packed up their boxes of evidence, and Jasmine was already looking for a lifeline. I reached over and tapped the screen, making sure to hit the record button on my secondary device before answering the call. Sydney. Please do not hang up, Jasmine whispered, her voice completely devoid of the arrogant country club drawl she had used earlier that day. I am hiding in the downstairs guest bathroom with the shower running so they cannot hear me. Bradley is in the living room screaming at a court-appointed lawyer, and Brenda is locked in her bedroom hysterically crying. You have to listen to me. I am listening, Jasmine, I said, keeping my voice perfectly neutral. How is the new luxury penthouse treating you? She let out a shaky, frantic breath, completely ignoring my sarcasm. Sydney, I swear to you on my life I had absolutely no idea what Bradley was doing. I thought the business was just doing incredibly well. He told me we had a massive surge in international logistics contracts. You have to believe me, I never would have let him forge your signature or steal from a bank. I am a mother-to-be. I would never risk my child's future like this. Her abrupt pivot from defiant accomplice to innocent victim gave me absolute whiplash. Just 6 hours ago, she had been rubbing Bradley's back during a corporate Zoom meeting, actively helping him steal my 30% equity stake. Now that the federal government had frozen her offshore shell company and seized her pristine white Range Rover, she was perfectly willing to play the naive, manipulated housewife. The FBI traced $700,000 directly to an offshore shell corporation registered solely in your name, Jasmine, I reminded her, taking a slow sip of my wine. That is not going to look like innocence to a federal judge. It looks like felony tax evasion and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. I know, she sobbed, the desperation in her voice entirely real this time. The agents told me they are preparing an indictment against me too. They said I could be facing 10 years. But Sydney, I can help you. I can help the bank secure an absolute bulletproof conviction against Bradley. I have proof that he orchestrated the entire thing by himself. I raised an eyebrow, intrigued by the sheer magnitude of her betrayal. What kind of proof? When he first started panicking about the corporate audit, Jasmine whispered rapidly, I got suspicious. I secretly recorded 2 of our arguments on my phone. In the audio, he explicitly admits to forging your name. He admits to transferring the funds to my account and telling me it was legitimate bonus money. He even admits that Brenda helped him shred the original loan documents to cover up the missing files. I have the audio files backed up on a hidden cloud drive the FBI did not find today. I will give everything to your bank, and I will testify against him in federal court as a cooperating witness. I will give you Bradley and Brenda on a silver platter. She was throwing her husband and her mother-in-law directly under the federal bus without a single second of hesitation. It was a breathtaking display of ruthless self-preservation. And what exactly is your price for this loyalty, Jasmine? I asked, already knowing she had a massive financial demand. I just need my debts cleared, she pleaded, her voice dropping to a pathetic whine. My credit cards are maxed out at $100,000 and the feds froze my checking account. I have absolutely nothing, Sydney. If you pay off my credit cards and wire me $50,000 to start over, I will hand over the recordings tonight. You get your revenge and I get to raise my baby without going to federal prison. Please, Sydney, we are family. The word family sounded completely toxic coming from her lying lips. Send me a short audio sample, I demanded coldly. There was a brief pause on the line before Jasmine spoke again. Okay, she whispered, her voice trembling with nervous energy. I am sending a 30-second clip to your encrypted email right now. Just promise me we have a deal, Sydney. I need that money. I did not promise her anything. I stayed perfectly silent, waiting for the notification to pop up on my screen. A moment later, a file arrived in my inbox. I clicked play and leaned closer to the speaker. The audio quality was slightly muffled, clearly recorded from inside a pocket or a purse, but the voices were unmistakable. It was Bradley sounding incredibly agitated. I signed her name, Jasmine Bradley, hissed in the recording. I signed the guarantor forms and submitted them to the portal. If the federal auditors look at the metadata, we are completely ruined. Then my mother's voice cut in, sharp and authoritative. Stop panicking, Bradley. I already took the original paper copies from your briefcase and put them through the industrial shredder at the office. There is no physical evidence left. Just keep your mouth shut. The audio clip ended. It was the final nail in their collective coffin. Brenda had not just enabled the fraud, she had actively participated in the destruction of evidence, making her a direct accessory to a federal crime. Did you get it? Jasmine asked desperately, her voice breaking into my thoughts. That is proof, Sydney. That is everything you need to lock them both up for years. Now please wire the funds to my alternate account. I smiled, taking a slow sip of my red wine. I got it, Jasmine. I replied, my voice devoid of any warmth. But we do not have a deal. You see, I do not need your hidden cloud drive to secure a conviction. I already gave the FBI the router logs, the security camera footage, and the financial trace showing the stolen money going to your offshore accounts. You are not a cooperating witness, Jasmine. You are a co-conspirator. What Jasmine shrieked, the sound of the running shower echoing behind her. You cannot do this to me. I just did, I said coldly. And Jasmine, just a quick heads up. I recorded this entire phone call. Have a wonderful evening with your husband. I hung up before she could scream another word. I immediately exported the recording of our conversation where Jasmine offered to sell them out for cash and attached it to a new email. I also attached the audio sample she had just sent me, proving Brenda's involvement in shredding the documents. I typed in Bradley's personal email address and Brenda's corporate email address. The subject line was simply titled Family Loyalty. I clicked send. I did not have to wait long for the explosion. Less than 3 minutes later, my phone began vibrating violently. It was a video call from Bradley. I answered it, letting the chaotic scene fill my screen. Bradley was standing in the middle of his living room, his face purple with absolute rage. He was holding his phone in one hand and pointing furiously at Jasmine with the other. Jasmine was backed against the staircase, sobbing hysterically and clutching her stomach. "You recorded me!" Bradley screamed at his wife, his voice cracking with sheer disbelief. "You secretly recorded me and my mother to save yourself. After everything I did for you. I committed federal fraud to buy you that car, Jasmine. I ruined my life to pay for your lifestyle." "I was just scared," Jasmine wailed, trying to reach for his arm. "The FBI froze everything, Bradley. I have a baby to think about. Do not use that child as an excuse," Brenda roared, stepping into the frame. My mother looked entirely unhinged, her hair messy and her eyes wild. "You treacherous little snake. You tried to extort Sydney for $100,000 while the police were raiding my house. I told you she was nothing but a gold digger, Bradley." The alliance was completely shattered. The united front of entitlement and manipulation that they had maintained for years evaporated in a matter of seconds. They were no longer the arrogant family members who thought they could easily steal my apartment and seize my equity. They were cornered rats viciously tearing each other apart to survive. "I am filing for divorce," Bradley shouted, throwing a vase across the room. It shattered against the wall, raining glass onto the hardwood floor. "You are going to prison right alongside me, Jasmine." I watched them scream at each other for another minute, feeling absolutely nothing but a profound sense of closure. I reached forward and ended the call, leaving them to their self-inflicted destruction. The toxic family war was finally over. I slept incredibly well that night. The knowledge that my family was finally facing the consequences of their actions acting like a soothing balm. For the first time in my life, I did not wake up feeling the crushing weight of my mother's expectations or the exhausting burden of cleaning up my brother's messes. I enjoyed a quiet breakfast on my balcony, watching the boats drift lazily across Lake Geneva before heading to the office. The next 3 days passed in a blur of intense corporate productivity. Without the constant manufactured drama of my American family draining my energy, I was able to fully immerse myself in my new role as vice president. I streamlined the bank's debt recovery protocols and successfully closed 2 major international restructuring deals. I was thriving. Back in the States, the situation was deteriorating rapidly for Brenda and Bradley. David called me every evening with updates. The FBI had formally indicted Bradley on multiple counts of federal wire fraud and corporate embezzlement. He was currently out on a heavily monitored bail awaiting trial, but his passport had been seized. Jasmine, true to her selfish nature, had immediately filed for divorce the morning after the FBI raid, effectively abandoning him the moment the stolen money dried up. But my mother, Brenda, was not one to simply accept defeat. I knew she was dangerous when backed into a corner, and I knew she would try one last desperate maneuver. I just did not expect her to cross an ocean to do it. It was Thursday afternoon. I was sitting in my glass-walled office reviewing a thick stack of European market projections when my desk phone rang. It was the head of corporate security downstairs in the main lobby. Ms. Sidney, the security chief, said, his thick Swiss-German accent clipped and serious. "We have an agitated American woman down here demanding to see you. She is causing quite a disturbance near the executive elevators. She claims to be your mother and says it is a matter of life and death." I set my pen down, letting out a slow breath. She actually flew here. With all her accounts frozen, she must have liquidated the very last of her hidden emergency cash, or pawned her jewelry just to buy a transatlantic plane ticket. "Send 3 security guards to flank her," I instructed calmly. "I will be down in 2 minutes. Do not let her pass the turnstiles." I stood up, smoothed the front of my tailored navy suit, and walked to the private elevator. I felt absolutely no fear. The woman waiting in the lobby was not the terrifying matriarch who used to dictate my every move. She was just a desperate criminal facing the collapse of her empire. The doors opened to the expansive marble lobby. It was the middle of the afternoon, and the space was filled with wealthy international clients, polished bankers, and visiting executives. Right in the center of the pristine floor stood Brenda. She looked entirely unhinged. The perfectly coiffed hair she maintained at the country club was a frizzy mess. She was wearing wrinkled clothes, clearly having flown overnight in coach, and her face was pale and exhausted. The moment she spotted me walking out of the elevator, her eyes widened with a frantic, desperate energy. "Sidney!" she screamed, her voice echoing sharply off the high marble ceilings. Several high-profile clients stopped their conversations to stare at the commotion. Brenda did not care about the audience. In her mind, public embarrassment was her ultimate weapon. She thought she could shame me into submission. "Sidney, you have to stop this!" Brenda wailed, throwing her hands in the air and marching toward the security turnstiles. The 3 large Swiss guards immediately stepped forward, forming a solid wall between us. "They are trying to give your brother 5 years in federal prison." 5 years, Sidney. "You cannot let them put my boy in a cage." I stopped a few feet away from the turnstiles, keeping my expression completely blank. "I am not putting him anywhere, Mom," I said, my voice low but perfectly audible. "A federal judge is. He committed a massive financial crime." "It was a mistake," Brenda sobbed aggressively, wiping tears from her cheeks, playing the tragic mother for the wealthy onlookers in the lobby. "He is just a boy who made a bad business decision." "You have all the power here, Sidney. You are a vice president. Just tell your bosses to drop the criminal charges and let us pay it back. I will sell my house. I will give you everything. Just give me back my son." She dropped to her knees right there on the polished marble floor, dramatically burying her face in her hands. It was the ultimate display of maternal guilt, designed to make me look like a heartless monster in front of my new colleagues. A few people in the lobby murmured, looking at me with questioning eyes. But I did not flinch. I did not rush forward to comfort her. I looked down at the woman who had spent 33 years tearing me down to build my brother up. "You cannot pay it back, Mom," I said, my voice slicing through the quiet lobby like a scalpel. "You do not have $2 million. You do not have a company anymore. And the bank does not want your house. The bank wants justice." She looked up, her fake tears instantly vanishing, replaced by a look of pure venomous hatred. "You selfish, ungrateful brat," she hissed, her true colors finally showing through the tragic act. "I gave you life. I raised you. You owe me." "I owe you absolutely nothing," I replied, my voice completely steady. "The debt is entirely yours." The echo of my words hung in the vast marble lobby. Brenda stared at me, her mouth opening and closing as if she were gasping for air. The realization that her ultimate weapon of maternal guilt had completely misfired shattered whatever fragile grip she had left on her sanity. She did not politely accept defeat. Instead, she unleashed a primal guttural scream that forced several nearby banking clients to visibly recoil. "You are a monster!" Brenda shrieked, scrambling to her feet and lunging toward the security turnstiles. She slammed her hands against the reinforced glass barrier, her face contorted in absolute fury. "I will destroy you, Sydney! I will go to the international press. I will tell the entire world that this bank employs a sociopath who framed her own brother for a crime he did not commit. I will make sure you never work in finance again." Her threats were completely unhinged and legally disastrous. I looked at the lead security guard, a towering man named Klaus, who was watching my face for a directive. I gave him a single sharp nod. "Madam, you need to leave the premises immediately," Klaus said, stepping forward in a fluid, highly trained motion. His two colleagues moved in perfectly synchronized, flanking my mother on both sides. "Get your hands off me!" Brenda roared wildly, swinging her designer purse at Klaus. "Do you know who I am? I am an American businesswoman. I am her mother. Tell them to let me go, Sydney. Tell them right now." I stood perfectly still watching the chaotic scene unfold. For 33 years, this woman had held absolute emotional authority over my life. When she yelled, I was supposed to cower. When she demanded a sacrifice, I was supposed to offer myself on a silver platter to keep the peace. But looking at her now thrashing against the firm grip of the Swiss security guards, I realized the terrifying matriarch of my childhood was completely gone. In her place was just a pathetic, desperate criminal who had run out of people to manipulate. "Escort her out," I told Klaus, keeping my voice flat and completely devoid of any emotion. "If she attempts to re-enter the building, contact the Geneva Municipal Police and press formal trespassing charges on behalf of the bank." "Understood," Vice President Klaus replied. The three guards seamlessly overpowered my mother. They did not drag her, but they forcefully marched her backward toward the massive revolving glass doors. Brenda fought them every step of the way, her heels sliding across the polished marble floor. She screamed my name, alternating between vicious curses and pathetic begging. "You cannot do this to your own family, Sydney!" she wailed, her voice cracking as they pushed her closer to the exit. "We are blood. You are killing your brother. You are killing me." I watched them push her through the revolving doors. I did not blink. I did not look away. I wanted to witness the exact moment the cord was permanently cut. The heavy glass doors rotated, depositing her onto the cold, pristine sidewalk of the Swiss financial district. Through the thick, soundproof glass, I could see her slamming her fists against the exterior panes, her mouth open in a silent scream. Pedestrians gave her a wide berth, staring at the chaotic American woman making a scene outside one of the most secure buildings in Europe. I stood there for a long moment, letting the profound silence of the lobby wash over me. The invisible chains of obligation and guilt that had weighed me down since childhood were instantly vaporized. The maternal bond was not just broken, it was entirely erased. I felt incredibly light. I turned my back to the glass doors and walked away. I did not look over my shoulder to see if she was still standing there. I swiped my security badge at the turnstiles, the satisfying green light flashing as the glass gates parted for me. I stepped into the private executive elevator and pressed the button for the 40th floor. As the elevator smoothly ascended, I pulled my phone from my blazer pocket. I opened my contacts, navigated to my mother's number, and pressed delete. I did the same for Bradley and Jasmine. The entire toxic chapter of my life was officially closed. I was no longer the family scapegoat. I was a vice president, and I had an empire to run. Walking back into my quiet office, I sat down at my desk and looked out over the deep blue water of the lake. A new email notification popped up on my monitor. It was a contract for another massive international acquisition. I reached for my silver pen and smiled. I had absolutely no family left holding me back anymore. 6 months passed. The crisp autumn air of Geneva had melted into a bright, bustling spring. During that time, I did not receive a single communication from my former family. The federal injunctions and no contact orders David filed saw to that. My life was entirely consumed by my escalating career at the Swiss investment bank, where my brutal efficiency had earned me the respect of the global executive board. But the final chapter of my American past still needed to be closed. It was a Tuesday afternoon in Geneva, when I logged into the secure federal court portal. Thousands of miles away inside a heavily guarded courtroom in downtown Manhattan, the criminal sentencing hearing for Bradley was officially underway. I appeared on the two massive high-definition monitors mounted on the walls of the courtroom. I was not there as a grieving sister. I was not there as a victim of family betrayal. I was seated at my polished mahogany desk wearing a tailored black blazer representing the multi-billion-dollar financial institution that Bradley had foolishly attempted to defraud. The camera feed from the courtroom showed a scene of absolute devastation. Bradley sat at the defense table and the transformation was staggering. The arrogant, untouchable golden child was completely gone. Because the federal agents had frozen all of his stolen assets, he could not afford the high-powered defense attorney he desperately wanted. Instead, he sat next to an overworked public defender wearing an ill-fitting cheap gray suit. He looked incredibly pale, his shoulders hunched, staring down at his handcuffs resting on the wooden table. Behind him, sitting in the public gallery, was my mother Brenda. She looked like she had aged 10 years and 6 months. Her expensive highlights were gone, replaced by graying roots, and she clutched a crumpled tissue in her trembling hands. She was entirely alone. The wealthy country club friends and the extended family members who had blindly supported her had completely vanished the moment the FBI indictment went public. No one wanted to be associated with a family facing federal wire fraud charges. The Honorable Judge Reynolds, a stern woman with zero tolerance for white-collar crime, banged her gavel to call the courtroom to order. She adjusted her glasses and looked down at the massive stack of evidence files resting on her bench. We are here today for the sentencing phase of the United States versus Bradley. Judge Reynolds announced, her voice echoing through my Geneva office speakers. The defendant has pled guilty to 3 counts of federal wire fraud, 1 count of aggravated identity theft, and 1 count of corporate embezzlement. The prosecution has laid out the undeniable evidence showing that the defendant intentionally forged digital signatures to secure a $2 million commercial loan, subsequently laundering those funds through offshore shell companies. Bradley's public defender stood up, clearing his throat nervously. Your Honor, my client deeply regrets his actions. He was under immense pressure running a struggling family logistics company. He made a terrible, desperate mistake trying to save the business and support his pregnant wife. We are asking the court for leniency, specifically a minimum security facility and a reduced sentence of 2 years, considering he is a first-time offender. Judge Reynolds did not look impressed. She turned her attention to the monitors, making direct eye contact with me through the camera lens. This court recognizes the representative for the defrauded commercial lender, Judge Reynolds stated formally. Vice President Sidney, does the Swiss investment bank have a statement regarding the requested leniency? I leaned forward, clasping my hands on my glass desk. My face was projected across the courtroom, towering over my brother and my mother. I kept my expression entirely neutral, projecting absolute corporate authority. Your Honor, the bank strongly opposes any leniency in this matter. I began, my voice crisp and unwavering. The defendant did not make a mistake of desperation to save a company. The forensic financial audit submitted into evidence clearly proves that the stolen $2 million was never injected into the logistics business. Instead, the defendant used the forged funds to purchase luxury vehicles, fund international vacations, and speculate on failed cryptocurrency markets. Bradley squeezed his eyes shut, his jaw trembling as my words systematically dismantled his only defense. Furthermore, I continued smoothly, the defendant did not act in a moment of panic. The evidence shows calculated, premeditated fraud. He stole the identity of a former executive, manipulated corporate routing numbers, and attempted to leave a completely innocent party responsible for a massive federal deficit. The bank requests the maximum penalty allowed under federal sentencing guidelines. We believe a severe sentence is necessary to reflect the sheer magnitude of his deceit and to deter future financial parasites from attempting to defraud international institutions. I paused, letting the heavy silence fill the courtroom. Judge Reynolds broke the silence, her expression hardening as she looked over her glasses at my brother. The defense claims this was a desperate business maneuver, she noted, her voice dry. But the prosecution has submitted digital exhibits provided by the Swiss investment bank that tell a completely different story. Vice President Sidney, would you care to walk the court through these exhibits? I would be glad to. Your Honor, I replied, tapping a key on my keyboard. I had prepared a specialized presentation exclusively for this sentencing hearing. Instantly, the secondary monitors in the federal courtroom switched from my face to the security footage from my penthouse apartment. This is Exhibit A, I announced, projecting my voice so every person in the gallery could hear. The footage showed Bradley sitting at my mahogany desk, sweating profusely as he practiced forging my signature on a scrap piece of paper before signing the official commercial loan guarantees. This video was captured by my hidden home security system on the exact afternoon the forged documents were submitted. He broke into my home using a stolen key and used my private office to commit federal wire fraud. Bradley sank lower in his chair, staring at the floor. The public defender rubbed his temples, clearly realizing his plea for leniency was entirely doomed. But I was not finished. I clicked to the next slide. Exhibit B is the digital fingerprint of the crime, I continued. The screen displayed the network router logs highlighting the IP addresses and MAC addresses. The metadata proves that the forged documents were uploaded to the American banking portal using my personal wireless network. The MAC address perfectly matches the personal laptop seized from the defendant by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. He deliberately chose my network to frame me for the crime should the corporate auditors discover the deficit. A loud gasp echoed from the public gallery. I looked at the camera feed and saw my mother Brenda pressing her hands over her mouth. For months, she had tried to convince everyone that I was a rogue employee, a malicious sister who had set up her golden boy. Now she was forced to watch undeniable high-definition proof of his premeditated malice broadcast in a federal courtroom. But the most damning evidence was the financial trace. I clicked to the final slide, bringing up the forensic audit. The defense argues the defendant was trying to save his family logistics company. I stated, my tone razor sharp. But Exhibit C tracks exactly where the stolen $2 million went. Within 48 hours of the loan disbursement, the defendant authorized a wire transfer of $700,000 directly to an offshore shell corporation registered in the state of Delaware. The sole proprietor of that LLC is his wife, Jasmine. I displayed the receipts side by side with the bank statements. The court can clearly see the stolen funds were immediately used to purchase a customized Range Rover diamond jewelry and chartered flights to Dubai. Another $500,000 was funneled into a phantom real estate development group and a defunct cryptocurrency startup. Not a single cent of the $2 million was used to pay vendor invoices, employee salaries, or operational costs for the logistics business. It was pure, unadulterated theft to fund a lavish personal lifestyle. The public defender stood weakly. Your Honor, we stipulate to the financial records. We are simply asking the court to consider the defendant's lack of prior criminal history. Prior criminal history does not excuse the sheer magnitude and sophisticated execution of this fraud. Judge Reynolds snapped, cutting the attorney off. The defendant utilized offshore accounts, shell corporations, and forged digital signatures. He exploited a familial relationship to secure the loan and then actively attempted to leave his sister financially ruined. There is absolutely no room for a defense of ignorance or desperation here. She looked down at Bradley, who was now openly crying, tears streaming down his face. The arrogance that had defined his entire existence was completely shattered. He had spent his whole life believing the rules did not apply to him because Brenda always bailed him out. But Brenda could not save him from federal evidence. She was sitting 50 feet away, powerless, watching her perfect son face the absolute reality of his actions. The bank has presented ironclad evidence of malicious intent, Judge Reynolds concluded, stacking the files neatly on her desk. The prosecution has proven that the defendant acted with total disregard for the financial institution, the employees of his company, and his own family members. The court finds the request for leniency entirely inappropriate given the severity of the offenses. I sat back and watched justice unfold. Judge Reynolds picked up her heavy wooden gavel, the sharp sound of it striking the sounding block echoing with absolute finality across the courtroom and through my computer speakers. "Bradley, please stand," she commanded. Bradley stood up, his knees visibly buckling. The public defender had to grip his elbow just to keep him upright. He looked completely hollowed out, a ghost of the arrogant executive who used to take credit for my 60-hour workweeks. For the crimes of federal wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and corporate embezzlement, Judge Reynolds announced, her voice ringing with unwavering authority. "I sentence you to 60 months in federal prison. Furthermore, I am denying the request for placement in a minimum security facility. You will serve your time in a standard federal penitentiary. You are also ordered to pay full restitution to the Swiss investment bank upon your release, though your seized assets will be liquidated immediately to cover the initial deficit." Bradley let out a choked, agonizing wail. His legs completely gave out, and he collapsed back into his heavy wooden chair, burying his face in his handcuffed wrists. "Bail is revoked," Judge Reynolds declared, ignoring his breakdown entirely. "The defendant is remanded into the custody of the United States Marshals effective immediately." Two massive federal marshals stepped forward from the side of the courtroom. They grabbed Bradley by the arms, hauling him roughly to his feet. This was the moment the illusion of the golden child was permanently shattered. Bradley was not a misunderstood genius. He was a convicted felon, and as the marshals dragged him toward the side door of the courtroom, my mother Brenda finally lost the last shred of her composure. "No!" Brenda screamed, launching herself out of her seat in the public gallery. "You cannot take him! He is a good boy! He made a mistake!" A court bailiff immediately intercepted her, physically blocking her from rushing the defense table. Brenda thrashed against the officers, sobbing hysterically as she watched her perfect son disappear behind the heavy wooden door of the holding cell. Bradley did not even look back at her. The door slammed shut with a heavy metallic thud. The judge gave a sharp warning to the gallery about maintaining order before officially adjourning the court. The feed on my primary monitor cut to black, leaving my Geneva office in quiet serenity. I did not feel sorry for him. I did not feel sorry for her. I took a long, slow sip of my coffee and turned my attention to my secondary monitor. Bradley had just faced the criminal consequences of his actions, but the financial consequences were far from over. I opened the master file for the logistics company portfolio. The $2 million loan was still massively in default. The frozen offshore accounts and the seizure of Jasmine's luxury cars had only recovered a fraction of what they had squandered. The bank still needed to balance its ledger. Fortunately for my employer, my mother had practically gift-wrapped the solution years ago. When Bradley first took over the family logistics company, he had absolutely no established credit. No legitimate commercial lender would approve a massive corporate credit line for an inexperienced 20-something with a history of reckless spending. So Brenda had stepped in to play the ultimate savior. She had signed a comprehensive cross-collateralization agreement, legally binding her own personal assets to the company's financial performance. She had leveraged her pristine $4 million estate to guarantee Bradley's early business ventures. She had assumed she would never have to pay the piper. She believed her son was destined to be a billionaire CEO, and her house was perfectly safe as collateral. She was incredibly wrong. Because Bradley used the corporate entity to commit federal fraud, and because the logistics company was now officially bankrupt, the collateral clause was automatically triggered. The Swiss investment bank possessed the absolute legal right to seize the guarantor's assets to satisfy the remaining corporate debt. I scrolled down to the punitive action menu on my secure banking portal. I saw the digital deed to Brenda's sprawling suburban estate, the very same house where she had raised me to believe I was nothing more than a workhorse. The very same house she had proudly offered as collateral to fund my brother's lavish delusions. It took exactly 3 clicks. I initiated the formal foreclosure protocol. The system immediately dispatched an electronic order to the local sheriff's department in my hometown. Within 48 hours, armed deputies would arrive at her front door. They would hand her a formal eviction notice. They would give her 30 minutes to pack a single suitcase before changing the locks and physically removing her from the property. The estate would be seized and auctioned off by the bank to cover the massive financial void her golden child had created. She had threatened to freeze my bank accounts. She had gleefully allowed Jasmine to steal my penthouse and tried to leave me homeless in Europe. Now, by her own blind arrogance and unconditional enablement of a criminal, she had legally signed away the roof over her own head. I pressed confirm, finalizing the foreclosure order. The screen flashed a brilliant, satisfying green. The debt was officially settled. The screen flashed a brilliant, satisfying green. The debt was officially settled. But the financial shockwave I had just unleashed was far from over. Back in the States, the absolute karma my family had so desperately earned was finally catching up to them piece by agonizing piece. Let us look at Jasmine first. She had always prided herself on being the smartest person in the room. The morning after the initial FBI raid, she had immediately filed for divorce, thinking she could simply cut ties with Bradley and walk away clean. She packed her remaining designer clothes into expensive luggage planning to quietly relocate to a luxury apartment in Miami and find a new wealthy husband. But Jasmine made a fatal miscalculation. She forgot that while the FBI handles wire fraud, the Internal Revenue Service handles undeclared offshore income. Because Bradley had registered the Delaware Shell Corporation entirely in her name, she was legally the sole proprietor. The IRS audited her immediately. They discovered $700,000 of stolen corporate funds that had never been declared on her personal tax returns. The federal government does not play games with tax evasion. They did not just seize the remaining stolen cash. They seized her personal checking accounts, garnished her future wages, and hit her with hundreds of thousands of dollars in severe federal tax penalties. Her credit score was completely obliterated overnight. With no money, an imprisoned husband, and a mountain of federal debt, Jasmine was forced to face the reality of the working class she had always looked down upon. She could not get a job in corporate administration because her background check instantly flagged her as a federal tax evader. Instead, she found herself working a minimum wage retail job at a sprawling discount department store in our hometown mall. The woman who once casually swung a $10,000 Hermes bag in my penthouse was now wearing a stiff polyester blue vest and a plastic name tag. She spent 8 hours a day on her feet, aggressively folding clearance sweaters and sweeping dusty dressing rooms. The ultimate humiliation came whenever her former country club friends strolled through the mall. They did not stop to offer sympathy. They deliberately walked past her register, whispering and pointing, while she was forced to scan their discounted merchandise with a strained customer service smile. While Jasmine was learning the harsh lessons of retail karma, my mother Brenda was experiencing a completely different kind of devastation. Exactly 48 hours after I clicked confirm on my Geneva banking portal, 2 marked sheriff vehicles pulled into the circular driveway of her sprawling suburban estate. Armed deputies walked up the front steps and handed her the formal eviction notice. They stood in her grand foyer with their hands resting on their utility belts and gave her exactly 30 minutes to gather her absolute essentials. Brenda walked out of her massive front doors for the last time, pulling a single rolling suitcase behind her. The deputies locked the heavy deadbolts and hammered a bright orange bank foreclosure sign directly into the perfectly manicured front lawn. Standing on the sidewalk, Brenda pulled out her cell phone. For decades, she had cultivated a loyal army of extended family members. She had always been the wealthy matriarch, the generous host who threw lavish holiday parties and handed out financial favors to keep everyone in line. She fully expected her loyal flying monkeys to rush to her rescue. She dialed Aunt Diane, expecting an immediate invitation to stay in her large guest house. Aunt Diane answered, but her tone was ice cold. She bluntly told Brenda that her husband did not want a disgraced homeless woman bringing federal media attention to their doorstep. She hung up and instantly blocked Brenda's number. Panic setting in, Brenda then called Uncle Paul. He let it go straight to voicemail. She tried Cousin Thomas, the exact same cousin who had left me blistering voicemails screaming about family loyalty. He answered just long enough to tell Brenda she was a toxic embarrassment to the family name before disconnecting the line. Every single relative who had blindly supported her, every aunt and uncle who had sent me abusive text messages, demanding I surrender my equity completely, abandoned her the second her bank accounts hit zero. They did not love her. They had only loved the money, the free dinners, and the prestige she used to represent. With the illusion shattered, she was entirely useless to them. Brenda was left standing on the curb completely alone as the sun began to set. With her credit cards frozen and no family willing to open their doors, she was forced to drag her suitcase a mile down the road to a cheap, dilapidated motel on the outskirts of the city. She used the last few crumpled $20 bills in her purse to rent a dingy room that smelled of stale cigarette smoke. The woman who had ruthlessly tried to steal my apartment and leave me destitute in Europe was now sitting on a stained mattress in the dark, entirely erased from the high society world she had sacrificed her daughter to protect. As Brenda sat shivering on that stained motel mattress, thousands of miles away, my own life was moving forward with pristine clarity. It was a Friday evening in Switzerland. I was standing on the expansive private terrace of my Geneva penthouse, a glass of perfectly chilled white wine in my hand, watching the city lights reflect off the dark, calm waters of the lake. The air was cool and smelled of fresh rain and pine. My personal cell phone buzzed against the wrought iron patio table. I picked it up and saw a notification for a new voicemail from an unknown number. My mother had clearly used the motel lobby phone to bypass the block I had placed on her personal cell. Out of pure clinical curiosity, I pressed play and held the speaker to my ear. Sydney. The voice was a ragged, pathetic whisper completely stripped of the arrogant matriarchal authority that had terrorized me for decades. It is your mother. Please pick up the phone. I have absolutely nowhere else to go. The deputies locked me out. Diane will not even answer my calls. I am in this awful, terrifying place by the highway, and I have no money for food. You have a huge corporate apartment in Europe now. Just buy me a plane ticket. Let me stay with you. You cannot just leave me here to rot. I gave birth to you. I am your mother, Sydney. I listened to the entire 2-minute message, staring out at the breathtaking silhouette of the Alps. I waited for the familiar wave of crippling guilt that had controlled my entire childhood. I waited for that programmed instinct to rush in, clean up the mess, and sacrifice my own peace to save her from the consequences of her own actions. But nothing came. I did not feel a triumphant surge of vindictive joy, and I certainly did not feel a single drop of pity. I felt absolute pure indifference. I lowered the phone, tapped the screen, and hit delete. I went into the carrier settings and permanently blocked the local area code of that cheap motel, ensuring no further calls could ever break through. For 33 years, society and my extended relatives had tried to drill a very specific lie into my head. They conditioned me to believe that blood is an unbreakable ironclad contract. They taught me that you must absorb financial abuse, psychological manipulation, and relentless gaslighting simply because you share DNA with your abusers. They demanded that I set myself on fire just to keep my brother and mother warm. But looking out over the serene waters of Lake Geneva, I finally understood the truth. Blood does not make a family, respect does. Loyalty, mutual care, and basic human decency make a family. If someone uses their biological connection to you as a weapon to extract your wealth and destroy your mental health, they are not your family. They are simply a parasite wearing a familiar face. People often think that getting revenge requires an aggressive counterattack. They think you have to plot, scheme, and actively try to ruin the people who hurt you. But the sweetest, most devastating revenge in the world is simply stepping out of the way. It is building a massive, impenetrable wall of personal boundaries and letting toxic people completely destroy themselves against it. I did not frame Bradley for a felony. I did not force Jasmine to evade federal taxes. I did not make my mother leverage her house for a fraudulent loan. I simply stopped being their human shield. When I removed myself from the equation, their entire house of cards collapsed under the weight of their own greed. You do not have to fight your abusers to win. You just have to stop saving them. To everyone listening to this story right now, I want you to take a hard look at the people in your own life. Are you carrying the weight for someone who only ever criticizes you? Are you funding the lifestyle of a golden child while you scrape by? Are you sacrificing your own future to appease a parent who sees you as a workhorse rather than a human being? If you are, it is time to pack your bags physically or emotionally and walk away. Stop setting yourself on fire. Build your wall. Set your boundaries and let them face the real world without your protection. You might be shocked at how quickly they fall apart and how beautifully you begin to thrive. Thank you so much for following my journey. If this story resonated with you, or if you have ever had to cut off toxic family members to save your own sanity, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel for more incredible stories of absolute karma, and remember to always protect your peace. I will see you in the next video.